Very good morning, Secretary Chris Hui and Dr. Ma Jun, and thank you so much joining Hong Kong GFA's 2020 Annual Forum, Financing a Green and Inclusive Recovery, and having a fire chat with me. Today marks the second anniversary of Hong Kong GFA. So 2 years gone by very quickly. We have seen good progress with sustainable finance in Hong Kong, with both the public and the private sector in embedding sustainability into the core activities. But what are the pain points that are preventing us to accelerate, the agenda? And what's your vision reflecting the new Hong Kong, updating the new Hong Kong action, climate action 2030 plus, and mainland China's recent commitment to be carbon neutral by 2060? Secretary Hui, I'd like to start with you.
Yep, thanks. I think similar to any policies that we push out, basically we have to be focused in terms of what we want to achieve. As you rightly said, there are a number of pain points that we see in terms of getting the corporate or the financial sector on board on green finance, which is, I'm sure, the theme of this organization. And there are two that I want to highlight here. First of all, is regarding standards. Because after all, as all of you can imagine, greenwashing is a risk that all of us have to handle. After all, there are some brown projects potentially which pretend to be green, and also insofar as investors are concerned, they may not have a full understanding in terms of how certain projects or companies being considered green. And that's why on that front, we specifically launched a green certification program under our Quality Assurance Authority. And the purpose of that is actually try to align the standards in terms of how we define green bonds, green funds, so on and so forth, such that green investors will be in the know, leveraging Hong Kong's role as a credible international financial center to highlight those genuine green projects or companies they can invest in. And right now, I'm glad to see that we are gaining traction. There are already a lot of pre-issuance certification and also post-issuance certification being done, despite the fact that this scheme is only launched 2 years back. And it's something we'll continue to do going forward in terms of making sure this asymmetric information, which I'm sure Dr. Ma as an economist will be in a better position to comment on, can be addressed through this standard setting. And another pain point, I would say, is a more practical one, is regarding money, the dollar sign. Because after all, green finance is a new thing to many corporates and also to many projects. And people may be inhibited by the initial cost that they have to incur in terms of reaching out to new investors or reaching out to the green community. And that's why the government has put together two programs, one targeting issuers who use the standards set out by the Quality Assurance Authority, as I said out just now, and also another program that we put in place to encourage green bond issuance, among other bonds, to be issued in Hong Kong. And the size of that subsidy that we provide is as large as 2.5 million Hong Kong dollars. And so I also want to take this opportunity to use the network built by HKGFA to promote these two programs, such that more corporates, more companies, more projects can use the green standards that Hong Kong deploy, which are in line with international ones.
Great, thank you so much, Secretary Hui. Dr. Ma, can you also supplement with the global view, particularly, your involvement with NGFS, and other positions?
Sure. No, I think Hong Kong has done a great job in terms of promoting its green bond market in the last couple of years. And now it's a very sizable green bond market in Hong Kong relative to its size of the economy. And the regulators in Hong Kong also issued various regulations regarding disclosure requirements, green banking, and so on. I think all these are important steps towards building a green sustainable financial system. Of course, there are pain points or barriers and issues. I think a couple of issues need to be discussed and addressed. One is, as Secretary Hui said, standards and disclosure requirements. These are very important, fundamental sort of elements of a well-functioning green financial system. On the standard side, I think the very important piece is taxonomy, which should clearly define what is green, what is not green. And maybe in the future, we should define what is transition. So Hong Kong eventually needs to have a officially designated set of taxonomy, which could be done locally and could be using in the future. Once China and Europe develop a common taxonomy, I think that could be an important reference for Hong Kong as well. On the disclosure side, we do have some disclosure requirement from the regulators already, but I think the refinement is very important. It needs to specify the specific indicators, quantitative indicators for corporates, for financial services sectors to disclose, so that these indicators will be used by the industry to really rank the greenness or the ESG performance of the issuers and also the market players. The third piece is about incentive. We have pretty strong incentive for the green bond market. That's really why Hong Kong green bond market grew rapidly in the past couple of years. But we probably need incentive for other green activities as well. In China, we know that a lot of local governments have put in place the green guarantee program, interest subsidy program. In Jiangsu province, they subsidize 30% of the interest payments for green bonds issued by the local issuers, which is very aggressive. I think Hong Kong should consider something like that, so it can cover a broader range of green activities. And the fourth piece is capacity. Capacity-wise, let me just give two examples. One is ERA, environmental risk analysis, which is something promoted by the NGFS, especially under my work stream, which is called the supervision work stream. And I clearly see that the Europe and UK are leading in applying environmental risk analysis methodologies. China, we have a couple of large financial institutions such as ICBC is now working on that. But Hong Kong, I have not heard any major financial institutions applying environmental climate risk analysis tools. This is a capacity area that we should strengthen. And the other example is ESG engagement. The growing number of fund managers which applied ESG methodologies principle to select stocks and other assets, but not many are able to engage with the invested companies to enhance their ESG performance. This is something done relatively well in UK, for example. Hermes is a fund manager which practiced ESG engagement for more than 10 years with great success. I think Hong Kong and mainland asset managers should learn from that.
Great, thank you so much. So there's no single bullet. You both dress very, good and practical, barriers for us, to address. So certainly, we do not tolerate greenwashing. For us to develop a robust green finance market, certainly we need more support, from the government. And then, when it comes to the market development, there are tools like environmental assessment, engagement, so on and so forth, that are required to fully embed, ESG throughout financing and investment decision making. So thank you so much for sharing. Well, can I also ask you to share a little bit more about China's latest commitment regarding carbon neutrality by 2060? It's certainly a game changer, right?
Definitely, it's a game changer in terms of the global climate agenda. It's a game changer for China, especially for the energy, transportation, building and manufacturing industry. I'm expecting that after the announcement of a carbon neutrality target by President Xi, all major ministries and a lot of local governments will develop their plan to implement carbon neutrality. And especially in the energy sector, what I expect is that a significant increase in resources and investments into renewable energy, and a significant decline in investment in fossil fuel related sector. And the transportation sector, we're going to see more provinces and more cities announcing plan to achieve electrification early on. For example, Hainan province has announced that by 2030, every single car on the street will be electric vehicle. And I think other provinces will have to follow. And on the building sector, previously we have a system of 3-star green buildings, 1-star, 2-star, 3-star. None of them achieve carbon neutrality. In the future, we will need to have a zero emission building standard, which will be applied to many more buildings going forward. And the manufacturing sector will need to invest massively on green technology to enhance energy efficiency and reducing other kind of emissions. So I think sector-wise, we're seeing lots of momentum because of the carbon neutrality target.
Secretary Hui, in light of China's development with the carbon neutrality vision, can you also update us about Hong Kong? I believe Hong Kong is also renewing or updating the climate action plan. What are the things that we can hope for?
Yeah, I think as Dr. Ma just mentioned, in fact, there are lots of discussion going on at the global and international level in terms of how governments to respond to climate change and also what are the responsive actions that we should take. And apart from the more specific environmental targets or actions that my colleagues on the environmental side has put together, including the Hong Kong's Climate Action 2030 Plus, I think more specifically on green finance, which is the theme of this organization or this forum, we try to lead by example. By that, just now, the two initiatives that we put together in terms of financial incentives for first issuance and also the using Hong Kong standards for green bonds and also green products. And also the other initiative that I mentioned in terms of promoting the Hong Kong's green finance landscape are something we try to do in terms of facilitating the overall development of the green finance ecosystem in Hong Kong. But that aside, I think the government itself should also lead in terms of participating in the market, such that we as a participant, not just as a regulator, will facilitate the growth and development of the green finance ecosystem. And on that, there are two specific things that we have done and also will commit to do. First of all is that the government has committed to issuing in the coming 5 years, 66 billion Hong Kong dollars equivalent of green bonds. This is a sizable amount, and also it illustrates our commitment to further enriching our green finance ecosystem, in particular on green bonds front. That's number one. And number two, I think another dimension that the government tried to lead by example is the disclosure point that Dr. Ma just mentioned. Because after all, whatever we do, whatever we issue, we have to be accountable for whatever we put forward to the public. And that's why we just launched our first issuance of a green finance report by the government. And I encourage all of you to get access to it through our Facebook, LinkedIn account, such that you will be in the know in terms of how the green bonds that we have issued so far are being applied across various government projects. I think disclosure reports or disclosure elements serve two purposes. First of all, of course, is to be accountable to the investors, such that they will be fully aware of the fact that we are not greenwashing and there are really green projects that we are applying those green bonds and green funds. That's number one. And number two, I think, is back to the point regarding engagement that Dr. Ma mentioned. Because after all, with all this disclosure of green projects, people can relate close to their mind and heart in terms of green finance, what does it mean to them? Because after all, as all of you agree with me that green finance or green stuff are rather vague or morally high sounding to many people. But we want to bring them to be something which is relevant and also very close to the daily livelihood of our community. And through the disclosure of a green finance report I just mentioned, basically you can see that the green bonds we have issued so far are being applied to the green buildings that we're going to build in the Kai Tak New area and also in many of the recycling facilities that our environmental colleagues are constructing. So all these kind of developments are actually very livelihood related. And there's another angle I want to bring up is in terms of how we can bridge the gap between the so-called Wall Street and the Broad Street. Because after all, whatever the government does, it has to be something understandable and also supported by the community. And it's not just about the financiers, not about bankers or the academics. It should be a wholehearted, holistic, and also communal support in terms of green finance. And that's exactly what we try to do.
Absolutely. I think finance needs to serve, real economy. So is sustainable finance, green finance, right? So it's good to really see the government is, leading by example and also using, the green bond as a way to resonate, with residents, in Hong Kong. And at the end of the day, the green finance is just a tool to ensure, green development, green infrastructure, green lifestyle, for everyone, in Hong Kong. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Since we're on this topic of China and Hong Kong climate agenda, can I say a few words on what Hong Kong should consider doing in terms of a more aggressive climate action? One point is that China has committed to 2060 carbon neutrality. And given that Hong Kong is a more developed economy relative to the average of China, I think Hong Kong should consider declaring 2050 carbon neutrality, which is in line with the commitments by Europe and UK. That's point number one. And my second point is that Hong Kong should consider its carbon market as a major instrument to enhance its carbon performance. So far, Hong Kong doesn't have a carbon market, partly because I guess it's too small, lack of liquidity and lack of infrastructure. But the Greater Bay Area, I think, is probably a better setting to consider an integrated carbon market, including Guangdong and Hong Kong and Macau. That's something we've been discussing under the GBA or Greater Bay Area Green Finance Alliance. I think if Hong Kong can agree with Guangdong and Shenzhen to develop a unified carbon market, at the same time creating a channel through which foreign investors can access the Greater Bay Area common carbon market, I think it will be a great step towards covering Hong Kong carbon emission and also connecting the global carbon market with the mainland carbon market.
Thank you so much. Certainly something that we want to aspire to, but let's see, how this will evolve. This brings to my actually third question. Certainly we are being challenged in any aspect of our life and work by COVID. So the long-term implications of massive events such as COVID and climate change, we will create winners and losers. So what are the significant challenges and opportunities for governments and policymakers in Hong Kong, as well as those in Belt and Road countries? Can I pick, Secretary Hui's brain and share a few points with us?
Thanks. As you rightly said, I think COVID, in fact, presents us with many challenges in terms of how we can deal with the present, yet at the same time without losing sight of the future. Because after all, as all of you agree that COVID is an immediate health hazard that we need to deal with globally. That said, what we are seeing here on the technological front or on the social behavior front, basically are something which is already undergoing. But it's just that COVID very much accelerated the trends and also make it so obvious that we can't ignore. Point regarding winners or losers, or in particular in the case of green finance, I think as all of you can see, a lot of the industries or activities which require context, like for example, tourism, retail, they are most hard hit in this situation because after all, there are a very imminent health concerns that we need to deal with. But for some other sectors, like financial services, like sectors which require less contact, they are very much in line with their overall trends and they're less affected by COVID. But that said, I would say that there are a few things that we should take advantage of to see how the government can further steer in terms of facilitating the wider adoption of technology. Because after all, with a population that's more eager to embrace technology right now in light of these COVID concerns, we are considering what are the specific things that we should put together such that we can encourage more wider application of technology in our daily lives, not just at the retail level, but also at the business level. Because after all, like for example, under my bureau, we have the logistics and also procurement side on the Treasury front, which is also under FSTB. We are also trying to see what we can do in order to facilitate businesses to go more technology savvy, such that in terms of their payment or in terms of the relationship with us, we can be more user-friendly. It is not something specific to Hong Kong, but also a global trend that we can take advantage of. And that's number one. And number two, I would say that apart from more livelihood or business facilitating angle, there's another angle I want to highlight in terms of financial market development. Because after all, Hong Kong is a comprehensive international financial center. And Dr. Ma, I'm sure you haven't been in Hong Kong for a long time and have been a long friend of us. You also share my belief that in fact there's a lot Hong Kong can do in terms of facilitating the development of our IFC to the next level. And I always see finance not for the finance sake, but as a means or as a tools to achieve certain social objectives. Like, for example, insurance. You talk about Belt and Road, and I think many of these countries are potentially subject to a lot of climate risk and also challenges. And how we can ensure those risks and to ensure that the projects that are undertaken in those parts of the world are being well insured and protected is something that we can address through financial means. By that, I mean using finance as the tools to ensure that those risks are insured. And that's why just a few months back, we have passed a legislation in our legislature to allow our captive insurers to issue insurance-linked securities, such that those insurance-linked securities can cover catastrophic bonds. Because after all, many of these catastrophes arising from climate change, for example, are unrelated to economic trends and economic cycles. So a lot of investors, especially like hedge funds, are very eager to use those to diversify their financial risk in terms of having a balanced portfolio, some focusing on the economic risk and some focusing on climate risk. And we are doing that step by step in terms of looking at our whole portfolio, covering banking, securities, insurance sector, among others, such that we can identify the tools needed to enable our financiers and also our corporates in such a way that they can deal with the climate risk through financing means in a more effective manner.
Right, thank you so much, Secretary Hui. Dr. Ma?
Yes, on the topic regarding winners and losers, let me focus on really winners and losers in this transition towards low carbon and probably zero carbon world. From probably more China perspective or global perspective, I think there are a lot of winners, especially in renewable energy sector, for example, wind and solar, hydrogen and offshore wind. These are all going to see much stronger demand and also much stronger investment growth going forward. Electric vehicle as well. The forecast in China is that the electric vehicle sales is going to grow 35% per year in the coming 5 years at least, and maybe even stronger. And therefore, electric vehicle charging stations will have to be set up everywhere in major cities in China. And green building sector is going to see massive growth, which will affect the entire supply chain. For example, ranging from raw material, which will be used by the green building sector, to the developers, which will have to develop the building in a cleaner way. And all the electric appliances need to be energy efficient, and lots of solar installation in the building. And of course, a lot of energy saving technologies need to be in place, plus the finance. They need to convert the traditional finance into green development loans, green mortgage loans, green building insurance, and so on and so forth. And in the manufacturing sector, I think electric energy efficiency technologies will be massively applied in all major manufacturing processes, and plus AI. Digital technologies can be used very, very widely to improve efficiency of energy usage and also resource utilization in general. On the loser side, what quickly come to my mind is coal-related sector. Coal mining and the coal-fired power generator will see a rapid decline in demand, and also investor appetite in oil gradually, and also fossil fuel vehicles, which will see very sluggish sales going forward. And within the manufacturing sector, I think the losers are inefficient energy users.
Absolutely. I think even the next day, right after President Xi Jinping announced carbon neutrality 2060, vision, the stock market reacted very quickly with, the renewable energy stocks, rose by, I think, about 30%. So that was fairly significant. So I think we're towards the end, but before you leave, I do want to ask the final question about Hong Kong. So looking forward, and we all believe the key to a sustainable future is through a green and inclusive recovery. So what are the collective and concrete actions that are needed to lead Hong Kong onto that path? Secretary Hui?
Taking into account, you just mentioned regarding the green recovery and also how we can use green as an impetus to facilitate socioeconomic growth. I would say that there are a few things that we are doing, and there's a few things that the public sector and also the private sector should join hands to do. First of all, I think insofar as the government is concerned, we should try to fill the information gap. By that, it could be one between issuers and also the investors of green products. Because after all, as Dr. Ma just highlighted, there are some issues regarding how people view green projects, and also at the same time, there may be a thorough understanding in terms of how investors should respond to these new trends. So I think our role is to fit in when the market is a gap, and the gap there is information gap. And that's why we have our certification program in place. We have put together a cross-regulatory steering group to put together a taxonomy as suggested by Dr. Ma. I think all these efforts are aiming to bridge the gap in terms of information gap between the issuers of green products and the investors of green products. That's number one. And number two, I would say that it's more at a general level in terms of how we can better leverage green and also use it in a way that can be aligned with our fintech or other technological developments. There are lots of discussions, among others, in terms of how we should leverage fintech in order to spur the further growth of Hong Kong International Financial Center. And in fact, to me, green and fintech are very much in line as the new dimension or new areas where we should delve in to further our role as a comprehensive IFC. Because after all, for green finance to take place, or for green recovery to take place, there has to be data. And data is something right now widely dispersed. And also behind data, there has to be analytics, such that people can make sense of those data. And that's exactly fintech can fit in, because after all, as Dr. Ma just mentioned, there has been like AI, data analytics, blockchain, so on and so forth. All these new technological tools basically enable us to, in a more effective way, better understand social behavior. And also better understand to collate data in such a way that we can be more forward-looking in terms of our policies. Because after all, when we formulate policies right now, no matter how good we are in terms of forecasting the future is uncertain. But with data, with numerous data sources, it enables us to be in a more certain terms, try to articulate these uncertainty, or at the very least, to better understand the uncertainty, and also to make sure that the policies that we put forward will be in line with how the society may go going forward. So it is something that will enable not just finance per se, but more specifically for green development in terms of how we can link fintech and also green together. And also, like for stock exchange, they have put together the STAGE program. Basically, it is the first ever attempt in Asia to have a sustainable and green exchange, such that there can be a one-stop shop in terms of all the green-related data of the products and companies listed on our exchange. So bit by bit, we are doing that, and also step by step, we are pushing forward, and we look forward to further cooperation with HKGFA and also across GBA to make sure that this whole thing works together.
Great, thank you so much, Secretary Hui. Dr. Ma, your final few words.
Sure. In terms of future actions, let me divide this discussion into two parts. One is what government should do, and the other one is what private sector should do. On the government side, I think a vision, especially medium and long-term vision, is very important. Just take the example of carbon neutrality targets announced by China, by Europe, by UK. I think these targets are already creating very strong momentum for the real economy to move towards green and low carbon. Even before the specific concrete actions is out, simply by announcing the carbon neutrality target will drive a lot of resources, including financial resources, towards green. And the second thing is about coordination, because green activities, green finance is not a task of single agency within the government. In China, my experience is that we had to organize 7 different ministries to coordinate, using financial, fiscal, environmental regulation, and other resources to jointly promote the establishment of ecosystem for green finance. Hong Kong, gladly, I'm seeing the cross-agency now working, which is a very good step towards better coordination. And the third point is on incentives. We need stronger incentives to promote green transition, especially financial resources allocation. And in this regard, I think Hong Kong can consider some sort of risk weighting adjustment by raising the risk weights for brown assets and reducing risk weights for green, so that it creates an internal incentive within the financial industry to generate more resource allocation towards green and reducing exposure to brown. From private sector perspective, there's so many things we can do, as we've been doing in the past 2 years under the Hong Kong GFA, we have created 7 working groups promoting various aspects of the market development, capacity building. But let me just give you a couple of examples of what we should do going forward. One is innovating on transition finance. Previously, we have green finance, which covers green bonds, green loans, green funds, and so on, which are largely restricted to very clearly defined green activities. But what if we need to promote a transition of, let's say, coal-fired power generator towards green, instead of closing it down, which will lead to financial risk, for example, bad loans and social risk such as layoffs? Can we think about something like a transition bond, using the proceeds to buy out a coal-fired power generation company and convert this company into a clean energy company within 5 years, so that we can stop emission within 5 years, and we can reduce financial risk by ensuring that this company continue to pay off its loan to the banking system, and the company will retain the workers. So this is a type of transition which financial sector has to help facilitating, and we need a lot of innovation in this regard. The second point is on ERA, I mentioned earlier. It's something that's being promoted by NGFS, which is the Central Banks and Supervisors Network for greening the financial system. In the past 2 years, I was serving the chairperson for the supervision workstream, which recently produced 2 documents. One is called Overview of Environmental Risk Analysis by Financial Institutions, and the other one is called Occasional Paper on Case Studies of Environmental Risk Analysis methodologies. I strongly encourage our members in the Green Finance Association to study these methodologies and apply many of these methodologies to your work, because such methodologies such as scenario analysis, stress testing on climate-related transition and physical risks will enable you to transit towards green and low carbon exposure more quickly, and help you to reduce your risk exposure arising from environmental and climate risks. The third example or third point I'd like to make is promote the integration of Greater Bay Area green finance resources. This is something we've been doing in the past year by initiating the Greater Bay Area Green Finance Alliance, which is a consortium by Hong Kong Green Finance Association, Guangdong Green Finance Committee, Shenzhen Green Finance Committee, and Macau Banking Association. And just a month ago, we launched it officially in Guangzhou with 5 projects, which covered at least 3 that's been sponsored by Hong Kong, including green building, the unified carbon market, and also blockchain-based green asset trading. I think all these activities will help mobilize more resources throughout the Greater Bay Area towards green, and we need more participation from our members and from all financial sector players in Hong Kong and in the region.
Great, thank you so much, Dr. Ma and Secretary Hui. Just so much, takeaway for us to go back and think about, true implementation. But unfortunately, our time is up. So I just want to really thank both of you, Secretary Hui from SFTB, Dr. Ma, for your insightful thoughts with our members and our friends who are joining the online session with us today. So I wish you and your family all the very best, and take good care and keep on the fire and energy to accelerate and scale up sustainable finance for green and inclusive recovery, in Hong Kong and beyond. Thank you so much again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chaoni.
Thank you.